what we're looking at here is a political cartoon that was published by the Philadelphia Press. And it says 1898, 10,000, bless you, 10,000 miles from tip to tip. One tip of the eagle's wings are in Manila in the Philippines, and the other tip is in the Caribbean in Puerto Rico.
Did they need to spell wrong?
That's something we could research. That's a good idea. We'll take a look at that. We'll take a look at that. So, what event, let's bring it down please. What event would the United States have been involved in for about 6 months in 1898 that would have expanded the era of American imperialism? Very good. Spanish-American War. Excellent.
Wait, is it 1898?
That it is. 1898. Very good. So that's what we're getting into today. So some of the causes of American imperialism, you're looking at, really the start of this is something we already learned about, and that is the purchase of what large piece of land for $7.2 million. Alaska, very good. So again, basically from the era of the end of the Civil War with that purchase of Alaska all the way to the end of World War I, this is the American era of imperialism. Or you hear it called the era of American imperialism. So a lot of it has to do with foreign policy of a nation moving toward expansionists. We're becoming a global power militarily, a global power economically, and we don't want to be alone in that course of action. We want to be able to keep up with Britain, Germany, Great Britain, France, Japan, and Russia in dividing up lands in other parts of the world, whether it be in the South Pacific, or in the Pacific, or in the Caribbean. Obviously, England, Germany, France, Russia, the Netherlands, Portugal, Spain, they're all vying to either hang on to colonies they have or gain colonies they don't in places like North, West, East Africa, South Africa, the interior like the Congo, South Pacific, present-day Vietnam, the Philippines, the carving up of China, and then islands throughout the Caribbean. Obviously, we also can make connections to our own policies of Monroe Doctrine, the idea of expanding manifest destiny, continuing to spread our influence further. Here are a couple of cartoons, political cartoons showing England, Germany, Russia, and Japan carving up China at the turn of the century. This particular guy in the pork pie hat, he represents Great Britain. And this shows Britain's reach into North Africa for gold, for diamonds, for petroleum, for control of what large canal?
Did you spell China wrong?
This is the way in which that China was spelled in a lot of these cartoons.
Oh, okay.
I'm glad you all said Panama, and that's not the canal I'm looking for. We are going to be involved in that canal. What canal does England want over here? Right around here. What canal?
Arabian.
Think Egypt.
Nile, Canal?
Suez. Suez Canal. And that's going to be a really big deal come World War II. We'll be getting into that a bit later. All right. Economic factors. Foreign trade. Obviously, America wants to expand its foreign trade because what are we outproducing the world in right now? Steel. Good. What else?
Tobacco?
Somebody said tobacco. You're right. Oil. Good.
Cotton.
Yes. Britain's now on the scene and with their Indian colonies with cotton production. But you guys are right. Corn, tobacco, steel, petroleum, agriculture and steel, but also finished products. We start large-scale manufacturing, right? Like automobiles, right? We were doing that then. Definitely buttons. We'll have to
We're obviously not as cool as
take a look. That's a good little history to look back on. I've never thought about that. All right. Search for new marketplaces abroad. Obviously, what country do we want to consume our goods? China. Yeah. That's wild, right? Where now China wants us to consume their goods, you know? And then the idea of the economic safety valve. If you can just produce and produce and produce with no fear of what factors in the economic cycle. Yeah, overproduction creates what do we call that in econ? Surplus. Very good. So you don't have to ever have that fear of surplus. You just keep producing and well, I mean, clearly you do have to have a fear of surplus because we're going to talk about these economic panics that we've already talked about some of the economic panics, but we're about to come up on the worst economic panic and disaster that America and the world ever saw, come the Great Depression, yeah. So continue manifest destiny spreading beyond our borders, following the American Civil War, spreading our influence, spreading democracy. Woodrow Wilson will say we must make the world safe for democracy. Racism, all right? This is a big problem with imperialism. Early on in our time together, we talked about Jared Diamond's Guns, Germs, and Steel. I remember Yali, the guy in Papua New Guinea, said to Jared Diamond, why do you have cargo and we have none, right? Well, that comes down to the era of imperialism that, you know, people like Yali and people that were maybe island people or indigenous people to a region, well, America or Britain or other global powers felt like they needed to sort of put their cultural footprint in those places. Social Darwinism, we talked about that on the economic side when we talked about Andrew Carnegie's Wealth of Nations. Well, now we're looking at it on the social side of the survival of the fittest with Herbert Spencer and Lester Frank Ward. Yeah, of course. Spread of the Christian religion. This is the rise of the era of what group that goes out to spread the word. Missionaries, right? Has anybody out there ever heard of Henry Luce, the guy that founded Time Magazine and Life and Fortune? His family were missionaries. We talked about, did I talk about Lottie Moon? She's like what was a very famous Baptist missionary. So these are, Josiah Strong is going to be part of that movement. And we got economic dominance of this in this era, the growth of imperialism. And here is the sort of Uncle Sam sort of fishing for islands as a result of the Spanish-American War, affairs in Cuba, Guam, Puerto Rico, and the Philippines. Here are soldiers that were mobilized for the Spanish-American War. An important person to take a look at here is Alfred Thayer Mahan. He is going to influence Teddy Roosevelt, as will Chester A. Arthur. Chester A. Arthur, remember, he starts the buildup of the Navy. TR follows through with it. Did we talk about Queen Liliuokalani? Yeah, Queen Lil. So remember, Queen Lil is overthrown in a military coup d'etat by the U.S. Army, and the push for it is, well, it's really more than the Army. It's also congressmen and you know, senators and other people that are behind a multitude of economic plans like sugar production, coffee production, fruit and pineapple production, the ability to own Pearl Harbor. Remember we talked about it being a fueling station? We talked a little bit about yellow journalism. Hearst and Pulitzer they start spreading stories about the revolution that's taking place in Cuba and the revolution taking place in the Philippines. The one in Cuba is led by Jose Marti. The one in the Philippines is led by Emilio Aguinaldo. And both groups are fighting against what country? Not Britain, Spain. Very good. So we look at the Spanish-American War. What pushes us into the Spanish-American War are war hawks like Deputy Secretary of the Navy Teddy Roosevelt, but also a very interesting set of events like the sinking of the USS Maine. That was, we later found out, really wasn't sunk by, torpedoes. It was sunk by boiler explosion. But that was enough for Roosevelt, without the consent of the President, the Secretary of War, or the Secretary of the Navy, deploys naval forces to the Philippines to attack Manila Bay. He resigns his post and raises up the fighting force known as the Rough Riders, which he'll be one of the military commanders. This is a 6-month war. Secretary of War John Hay calls this a splendid little war. It leads to the Platt Amendment and the Teller Amendment. The Teller and Platt Amendments give America the ability to basically stay involved in Cuban affairs all the way up to
Second World War.
beyond.
Vietnamese War?
60.
Before the Vietnam War and after World War II.
Philippines.
Just after the Korean War. It's being put together during, around the time of the Korean War, the Communist Revolution of Cuba. Castro and Guevara. Yeah.
How, like, I don't understand how they can have the right to, like, intervene in, like, another country. How, like,
So at this point, Cuba was appealing for their help. Aguinaldo was thrilled to have the help.
Okay.
But once it was all said and done, Aguinaldo and Marti were like, thanks for the help, we're good. And American sugar growers in the Philippines said, I think we're going to stick around.
Is that why you hate Cuba today?
Well, that story I would like to unfold a bit later. I can.
Can I get it? Trump. What is Trump?
So, well, hold on. Kayla's going to tell you.
So basically, Russia kind of persuaded Cuba to kind of be communist, and since we're Americans, communism is bad. Yeah. Oh. Russia.
But here's the thing. We were pretty much the puppet master of all Cuban leaders all the way up to the Communist Revolution. So we were like pulling the strings on the Batista regime. So when Castro and Guevara and those guys toppled the Batista regime in the Communist Revolution, we became instant enemies, right? And then when Russia started to move missiles to Cuba to have them close to us, we placed an embargo on Cuba led by John F. Kennedy that lasted until President Obama was in his second term. And that embargo is really not, now it's kind of a little bit dicey right now because traveling and trade is still very limited with Cuba. Yeah. Of course, that's why they plan for defensive. I mean, we attempted to retake the island by training Republican-backed commandos, and it ended disastrously. It was in a disastrous situation called the Bay of Pigs invasion. But we're going to get back. We're going to get to that in a little while. That like later in the semester. Yeah. What's that? Yeah, go for it. So, remember the Maine, to hell with Spain. That was the battle cry. And to answer Kayla's question, I don't know about stickers, but there were buttons that said, remember the Maine.
I looked at the stickers, and apparently Britain was the first to technically mass produce, and then sometime in the Second World War, 1945, is where America started to like
Yes.
adjusted, and they created like the smiley face that we know today.
Yeah.
And I'm still really salty because why bridge? Why couldn't we be the one to make this difference?
I don't know. It's cool. It's good history right there. That's popular culture. I like it. All right. So again, Teddy Roosevelt jumps over the head of Navy Secretary John D. Long. He commands or cables Commodore George Dewey, who was in command of the American Asiatic Squadron in Hong Kong, to attack the Philippines, which he did. Remember, TR leads the Rough Riders. They charge San Juan Hill in July of 1898. By the end of July, the United States is going to win this war. Spain will have nearly all of their fleet destroyed, and they will cede Puerto Rico, Guam, and the Philippines to the United States. And due to the Tellers and Platt Amendment, we not only get involved in nearly all Cuban affairs, but we also get Guantanamo Bay. August 12th, 1898, Spain signs the armistice. So, what's gained here? Puerto Rico, Guam, Philippines are all annexed. The United States asserts the right to intervene in Cuban affairs, and the United States also gained control of Guantanamo Bay. All right, so what we're going to do, I would like for you guys to, does anybody have any questions?
Why is
We are.
Filipino spelled with PH but Filipino spelled with?
I know. Interesting, huh? Yeah.
What was the name of the comic that spelled Puerto Rico wrong?
It's the Philadelphia Press. We good? Any other questions? All right, we're going to pump the brakes. That's it for